Welcome to the City of Tampa's 135th birthday celebration. Happy birthday, Tampa. Tampa became a city on July 15, 1887, and we are celebrating its history with our annual Archives Awareness Week. This brochure has a schedule for the week, which includes many wonderful exhibits and programs with our Archives Awareness Week partners. As a matter of fact, we had a great program yesterday. It was at the Plant Museum, and I understand it was wonderful and well attended. We hope you will enjoy all the festivities. Today's program will highlight historical events that took place in Tampa 100 years ago. At the end of the program, you will receive a copy of our new publication, Tampa in 1922, which features articles from today's presenters as historical photos and more articles on Tampa's history. Before we begin today, we would like to recognize all current and former elected officials who are in attendance. I know I saw Councilman Vieira. Okay, thank you. And we also have some other friends, aside from our presenters, important people. I know you all are important, and we are humbled that you would join us today. If there is anyone that I did not recognize, Mr. Montego, you want to stand up? Okay. We would like to now give a warm welcome to Mr. Fred Hearns, Curator of Black History at the Tampa Bay History Center. Fred served the city of Tampa for more than 30 years, retiring in 2007 as the Director of Community Affairs. He has 2 master's degrees, one in Human Services from Spring Hill College, and one in Africana Studies from the University of South Florida. Today, he will be discussing the distinguished life of Blanche Armwood. Please welcome Fred Hearns.
Well, thank you, Shirley, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be invited to come back again. I look forward to this, actually, each year as we celebrate the anniversary or the birthday of the city of Tampa becoming incorporated. I'll just mention this also because I happen to know that Shirley Fox Knowles is a graduate of Florida A&M University, which was also founded in 1887. And you know, it's a wonderful thing when we realize the importance of our history. We shouldn't just wait for the 4th of July or New Year's Day or whatever. There's significance in every month, every week, and really every day. One of my heroes for several years, the eminent historian, Professor Dr. John Henrik Clark. It was Dr. Clark who said, if you really want to understand history, and if you're looking at a specific event or a specific person, anything of significance, go back 100 years and look at the roots of that person, or that person's family, or that event, or that city. That will really help you understand what happened 100 years later. So this is 2022. I'm happy to go back and talk about one of the most outstanding citizens Tampa ever produced, and 100 years ago, what was happening in 1922. That was only 58 years after slavery ended in Tampa. Just think of that, just a little more than one generation. 58 years is not a long time. Those of you who are very young, believe me, 58 years is not a very long time. So we want to look at this woman, Blanche May Armwood, and I'm going to see if I can advance the PowerPoint, if you'll look overhead and follow with me. 100 years ago, 1922. What a year and what a woman. We know that Blanche was born on January 23rd, 1890. Her father was Levin Armwood Jr., who was Tampa's first black police officer. He held many other positions of importance during that time. He was town marshal, tax collector, worked for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, a school superintendent, a local minister, an absolutely outstanding individual. Blanche's mother was Maggie Holloman. And those of you who follow Tampa history, you may have heard of that name before, Holloman. Mills Holloman, her grandfather, was the first African American to be elected on the Hillsborough County Commission. And all of these folk were vast landowners. Let's move forward to the 1920s, and Levin Jr. and Maggie moved to Washington, D.C. Blanche would join them a little later on, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. Maggie's father, Mills, owned some 80 acres of land in Seffner. And those of you who are familiar with Hillsborough County, I'm sure you're aware of Armwood High School in Seffner. The reason that that school bears Blanche Armwood's name is because of the presence of the Armwoods in Seffner going back more than 100 years ago, where they were successful farmers and landowners. Her uncle, Adam Holloman, was on the county commission, and he owned 80 acres of land in Seffner. And her brother, Walter, along with Blanche's father, owned the Jim Drugstore, the first drugstore owned by African Americans in Tampa. And it was located on that thoroughfare that I've talked about before, and I'm sure many of you have heard about before, Central Avenue. Right at the beginning of the explosion of Central Avenue, as a black business district, as an entertainment mecca, Central Avenue was the haven for young black men like myself who grew up here in Tampa, where we could go and we were welcome in all of the restaurants, the movie theaters, the stores. Later on, our parents and those who were older than us could go to the wonderful clubs like the Cotton Club and like the Apollo, like the Little Savoy. And so the Armwoods were also part of that explosion of Central Avenue. And again, we look at Walter and Blanche's father, Levin Jr., who owned the Jim Drugstore. The Armwoods also were the most photographed family among African Americans during that time period. So we actually have photos of Walter and his wife inside the Jim Drugstore on Central Avenue, photos that were taken on Christmas Day of the entire Armwood clan out in Seffner, and several photos of Blanche. That was very unusual for that time. The other thing that I found interesting as a boy, I grew up in East Tampa, just a few blocks away from the Italian cemetery. And I would ride my bicycle up and down 26th Street from time to time, and I would always stop at the southernmost tip of the Italian cemetery, where there were all of these tombstones with black people's faces on them. It was the first time I'd ever seen an African American with their picture on a tombstone. And one of those pictures was of Blanche Armwood. The Armwood family is buried there, and just a few weeks ago, we had a wonderful historic marker dedication, the most recent one in Hillsborough County, where the College Hill Cemetery finally has a historic marker to let people know that at that location where the Armwoods, the Hollomans, and hundreds of other black people are buried, was the College Hill Cemetery. And that's where you'll find Blanche. Now, as Blanche was growing up in Tampa, there were a lot of things happening around her, and this is just to give you a snapshot of what was going on when she was a girl. We know that 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision was handed down that made separate but equal the law of the land. Whether it ever existed or not, in reality, it was the law of the land. And that it did not violate the 14th Amendment when it came to the rights of black people. 1898, when Blanche was 8 years old, we had some 3,000 Buffalo soldiers who came to Tampa prior to leaving for Cuba in the Spanish-American War, and they camped all over this area. There is a historic marker at Columbus Drive and Central Avenue, the Buffalo Soldiers in Tampa Heights. And it talks about one of the things that happened when those soldiers were stationed here and how there was a violent clash with some of the white soldiers nearby who were not accustomed to seeing black men walking tall, holding their heads up with guns in uniform, who were trained to use those weapons and who didn't take any stuff from anybody. And so there were people who were shot, who were wounded, even before they got to Cuba because of the violence that happened in Tampa. All that's captured on that marker. Blanche was 8 years old when that happened, and certainly this was a conversation, I'm sure, at the dinner table where she grew up. In 1900, we know that we were in the midst of segregated schools, segregated jobs. There were only certain employers who would hire black folk for only certain positions, normally the least paying jobs. We didn't have a black hospital in 1900. We had a few small concerns where people who needed medical care could go because someone may have had some training, but Claire Fry didn't open her home as the first official black hospital until 1908. So in 1900, in the midst of all of this segregation, Blanche Armwood was growing up, understanding that, yes, we have all of these obstacles placed in front of us, but because of her family and the strong tradition of achievement that the Armwoods had, they passed that down to her. 1902, at the age of 12, she graduated from St. Peter Claver Catholic School and passed the Florida State Teachers Examination at the age of 12, which meant that she was eligible and certified to teach school at the age of 12. What Blanche opted to do, however, and I'm sure after discussing it with her parents, was to go to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, at that time Spelman Seminary. And in 4 years, she graduated with a degree in English and Latin, summa cum laude, at the age of 16. And so at the age of 16, she did decide to come back to Tampa, back to Hillsborough County, and she began teaching. And one of the schools where she taught was school number 2, which was the Harlem Academy, the first school for African Americans in Tampa. This is what Blanche looked like at the age of 16 when she graduated from Spelman. And by the way, we have a group of Spelman alumni, some wonderful young ladies here in Tampa, the Tampa Bay chapter of Spelman alumni. They're honoring Blanche later on this year, and I don't have all the information in front of me now, but I know on September 7th, there will be a program at the Tampa Bay History Center, and at that program, they'll be honoring Blanche Armwood and talking a little more in depth about her service with the Tampa Urban League, where she was the founding executive secretary, and also the first supervisor of Negro schools for Hillsborough County. Blanche did all of that at a very young age. This is a picture of the Armwood family in 1912. Blanche was 22 at that time, and I wish I had a pointer, but she's standing to the right of the man, there's a man right in the middle with a dark coat and a white beard. She's standing directly to his right. And this is the Armwood family. And again, the most pictured, the most photographed family, African-American family at that time in Hillsborough County. Blanche actually was a pioneer in an area that today we call home economics. I believe that's what we still call it. That's what we called it when I was in high school, where young women and young men learned domestic science, and she was considered an expert in that field. In the late around 1916, 1917, 1918, and the early 1920s, when a lot of new equipment was coming into the marketplace, where people were using modern stoves and other equipment to cook their food, to warm up their homes, and they wanted to make sure that their maids, who for the most part were African Americans, were trained in how to use gas appliances and make sure that they didn't burn the house down. And so Blanche became an expert in that field, first in Hillsborough County, and then she started getting calls from all over the country. She traveled up to Georgia, she traveled to South Carolina, she went to Virginia, and she worked in Louisiana, perfecting the craft of domestic science. And here she is in a kitchen doing some of that work. There were also schools that she set up. And in Hillsborough County, the first class that she taught graduated 200 women, African-American women, who learned how to operate this new equipment, and they were certified, and they were able to make a good living at what they had learned from Blanche Armwood. This was a woman of many hats. I have a friend who is, I guess you could say, a woman of many hats and who has a lot of different skills, a lot of things she's done. Some of you know Chloe Coney, and Chloe likes to say, I'm a woman of many hats. Well, also, we could say that about Blanche Armwood. In addition to what I've already told you about her experience as an educator and a trailblazer, she was the first executive secretary of the Tampa Urban League. Now, this happened in 1922. Blanche had gotten married a few years earlier than that to an attorney named Daniel Perkins. Daniel Perkins also, some of you may have heard that name before, was the first president of the Tampa NAACP. But prior to that happening, they got married, they moved to Tennessee, but shortly after the marriage and shortly after they relocated, Blanche discovered that Daniel had had an affair with a woman, and she had a baby. And all of this was a surprise to Blanche. When Blanche learned that there was this child and there was this other woman in the picture, she got an annulment. And so after that, she left Tennessee and moved to Louisiana. While in Louisiana, she met a dentist. And she and this dentist became engaged, Dr. Beatty, and they were married. Then Blanche returned to Tampa and began teaching at Booker T. Washington. At that time, Booker T. Washington, 1925, was a junior-senior high school. Later became strictly a high school. And she was doing all of these things at the same time because the Urban League needed her expertise with what she had done in domestic sciences, and also she had a heart for helping people who needed skills, who needed to be able to market those skills and help take care of their families. So we see some of the women who are surrounding her. Blanche is on the far right, sort of seated up with something around her neck, and she is looking toward the lady in the center. She also founded the Helping Hand Day Nursery. And Helping Hand Day Nursery is still in operation today in East Tampa. For many years, they were located in the Scrub, which is that area where Blanche was born and where she grew up and where St. Peter Claver is located. And many of the other people who were involved in Central Avenue lived in the Scrub. Helping Hand Daycare moved to East Tampa, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, quite a while ago. But that daycare is still going. And we lost the Tampa Urban League for many years, but it's been back for, 4 or 5 years now, I think. And we also know that the Tampa Urban League also had a very well-known individual associated with them. After Blanche stepped down as executive secretary, a young man came to Tampa named Benjamin Mays. At that time, Benjamin Mays had a master's degree, so did his wife. Very unusual to find a married couple, African Americans, who both had master's degrees. And Benjamin Mays replaced Blanche Armwood as executive secretary of the Tampa Urban League. Well, while she was assistant principal at Booker T. Washington. And as I mentioned, Booker T. Washington began as a junior and a senior high school. Later on, it became strictly a high school until Middleton High School opened in 1934, and then those high school students transferred over to Middleton. But Blanche Armwood also was someone who probably had known Booker T. Washington. With her travels and with the expertise that she had as an educator, at some point, I wouldn't be surprised to know that their paths crossed. She certainly had something to do with that first high school in Tampa being named for Booker T. Washington. And at the age of 12, Booker T. Washington, well, Blanche was 22. In 1912, when Booker T. Washington came to Tampa and spoke at the casino at what is now Plant Park at the University of Tampa, Blanche Armwood probably would have been in attendance had she been in Tampa at that time. But some people said she was the female Booker T. Washington. Okay, so she needed something else to do, another challenge. And later on in life, after her parents, who became ill, who were elderly at the time, and they decided to leave Seffner and move to Washington, D.C. They lived there for a few years in the 1930s, and Blanche decided, with her third husband, to move to Washington, D.C. Now, where did the third husband come from? Her second husband, Dr. Beatty, who was a dentist, and they were prominent, and they had money, and they were able to do things that many of the African Americans only dreamed of doing. They had a chauffeur. As it turned out, the chauffeur was a live-in chauffeur. There was a disagreement, there was a scuffle, there was an argument, out comes a pistol, and the chauffeur shoots and kills her second husband, Dr. Beatty. Blanche was, her world was turned upside down, and it happened right in front of her. I mean, she actually saw the murder. So she threw herself into church work. That's pretty much all she wanted to focus on, in addition to her job, but she spent a lot of time in religious circles, working in the church. And there she met a man who would be her third husband, Mr. Washington. They got married. They moved to Washington, D.C., and her parents were there. They needed her care, so I'm sure that she was able to provide a lot of support to them in their final years of life. Before they died, she enrolled at Howard University Law School. And in 1938, she graduated with honors from Howard University Law School in Washington, D.C. And as far as we're able to find, was the first black woman from Florida to graduate from an accredited law school. Now, Peter O'Knight had written a letter, and we actually have that letter, after she reached out to him and she asked him about the possibility of practicing law in Florida. And there were some questions about the Florida Supreme Court, some of the interests that she had in the legal field. And he actually wrote a letter back to her saying that He thought that she would make a fine attorney, that there certainly was a place for her in Florida, whether it be in Tallahassee or back in Hillsborough County. And that was in 1938. One of the things that Blanche was known for was her public speaking. And she gave speeches all over the country. She actually was one of those people who gave speeches for President Harding when he was campaigning for the presidency. And so she was in demand as a public speaker on a number of different subjects. She was a suffragette. And so before women got the vote, she was speaking all over the country about the importance of women getting the vote, which finally did happen in 1920. But of course, black women would have to wait in the South in large numbers to be able to vote. And so Blanche wanted to make a difference, and she thought that the law was another way, in addition to her being an educator, to make a difference. And Peter O'Knight agreed. But Blanche was away at a speaking engagement in Massachusetts, and she became ill. And she died as a result of that illness before she was able to return to Florida and practice law, which there's no doubt in my mind that she would have made an outstanding attorney here. Blanche, as I said earlier, is buried at the College Hill Cemetery at the site where most of us are familiar with, the Italian Cemetery in East Tampa, 26th Street. She died at the age of 49, way too soon. And look at what her headstone says, resting. And that sort of sums up her life, her adventures, her achievements, her ups, her downs, her sadness, her joy. And here is her legacy, Blanche Armwood High School. There's a beautiful portrait of Blanche hanging in the lobby of Blanche Armwood as you go into the main office and you look up on the wall and you see this woman there. You know, I've looked and looked and looked, and I've found dozens of pictures of Blanche. I've never seen a full-blown smile. She always had sort of that pensive look on her face, like she was thinking, she was trying to figure things out. She was seeing the deeper meaning in things. If you know anything about Armwood High School, you probably know that they've won a couple of state football championships. And so because of that, the name Armwood is known all over the state of Florida for people who follow high school athletics. But we know that this woman, had she been living today, would have been an outstanding individual. And because women have rights that they could only dream about having during her lifetime, there's no telling how far she could have gone. This is something that I wanted to pose, and then I have a question, and then I'll take my seat. And I don't expect you to give me an answer, but I just want you to think about the question. Back in 1908, there was an attorney here, Z.D. Green, excellent attorney, who decided that he wanted to run for municipal judgeship. And so he filed all of the proper papers. He did everything he was supposed to do. Everything was done in a timely fashion. But then he was told that his paperwork had been lost and his name did not appear on the ballot. And so therefore, he didn't have a chance of being elected judge. 2 years later, Tampa, and not only Tampa, but municipalities all over the South came up with the white primary. And the white primary party in 1910, for the next several years until 1947, restricted any African Americans from running for any race, for any public position in Hillsborough County. Perry Harvey Jr. was the first African American in the 1900s elected to the Tampa City Council. He was elected in 1982. He took his seat in 1983, 73 years after the white primary party began to restrict those opportunities for black people. And so here's the question that I want you to ponder as I take my seat. Had it not been for her ethnicity and her sex, what heights might Blanche Armwood have reached? Thank you. They always do this, I forgot. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, yes. Blanche Armwood Washington. What a woman. She was ahead of her time. Thank you, Fred. I could have listened to you all day. I really could have. He's a great historian, on his walking tour everywhere. Always has a story. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to, at this time, recognize Council Chair Joe Citro. And I would also like to recognize Dr. Bob Kirstein. He's a former University of Tampa professor, and he was on the Hillsborough County Historical Advisory Council. He was the historian there, and he did a fine job. We miss you, Bob. It is now my privilege to introduce the Honorable E.J. Salsinas, retired appellant judge and former state attorney, Hillsborough County. He is a native of Tampa and a career state and federal prosecuting attorney with a legal career spanning more than 55 years, including 16 years as the elected state prosecuting attorney, serving more than 14 years on the Florida's 2nd District Court of Appeal. He has 2 academic degrees, including his law degree, as well as 2 honorary doctorate degrees. He is a recognized local historian who has produced documentary programs on Tampa's history entitled Tampa, Untold Stories, which can be viewed on the City of Tampa television and YouTube. I think I've viewed all of them and still am reviewing. He's also the 2021 recipient of the Medal of Honor from the Florida Bar Foundation. Today, he will be talking about 2 notable events that took place in 1922, the founding of La Gazette newspaper and the death of Dale Mabry. Please welcome E.J. Salsinas.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you again, and I want to remind you that we are commemorating Archives Week. Many of you and your families have very valuable archives, documents, photographs, probably stuck up in the attic somewhere, probably in an old suitcase or in an old trunk. We ask you, especially during this week, go up there to the attic, open those relics, and share some of those with not only the city archives, but the Tampa Bay History Center and the special collection at the University of South Florida. Your history, your family history, is important to us so that future generations can enjoy the benefit of the great heritage that we have here in Tampa. Today, in our country, more than 100 local newspapers closed during this pandemic, this coronavirus that doesn't seem to want to leave. It's been around here 3 years, and every day some new variant shows up. But it has had a significant impact on journalism and newspapers. The New York Times reports that the past 15 years, more than 1 in 5 newspapers in the United States have shut down. That means that over 2,200 newspapers have closed down since 2005. That's confirmed by the Washington Post. Most of those that closed were weeklies, according to Forbes magazine. In Tampa, we're celebrating La Gaceta's Centennial celebration, a significant accomplishment of longevity when you compare all the newspapers that have failed in Tampa and in Florida and in the United States, as these statistics would show. It is a significant accomplishment of longevity. I'm especially pleased that the current publisher, Patrick Montega, is here with us today. Mr. Montega, we're honored with your presence. La Gaceta has a most impressive history here in Tampa. It is Tampa's historic multilingual newspaper. It started off 100 years ago, exactly May 22nd, 1922. It was then a 4-page afternoon daily, exclusively in the Spanish language, printed 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, serving the very large, extensive Spanish-speaking population in this area. The founder and publisher was Patrick Montega's grandfather, Victoriano Montega. He was a 28-year-old Cuban-born resident of Tampa since his arrival in 1914. He was quickly selected shortly after arriving from Cuba as a lector, a reader in the cigar factories. A lector, the educator, the man that brought education into the workplace where the cigar makers were rolling their cigars. The lector was not an employee of the cigar manufacturer. The lector was selected and an employee of the employees of the cigar factory. It was the cigar makers themselves who benefited from the education that this man was giving them every day that would contribute 15, 20, 25 cents towards the lector's salary. So Montega made a great hit when he arrived at the West Tampa Morgan Cigar Factory. The selection committee was so impressed with this young man, with his good voice, how he could change tones of his voice so that the person that's listening knows that it's a different character than the one that was just speaking before. He could project his voice. Of course, remember, we had no amplification system. We had no microphones. The lector sat in a platform, an elevated platform, in the middle of the work gallery, and he would lecture for an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the afternoon, with a great distinction. The morning lecture or lectura was totally newspaper-oriented. Of course, the newspapers were all read in Spanish, so they were very capable instant translators that could look at an American newspaper and make a quick instant translation like you would find in the United Nations, and you would find it in the many factories here in Tampa. They read from many different articles. They subscribed to different newspapers. They kept abreast of different magazines, and they came prepared in the morning to give the listener, the cigar maker, a breaking news of what was happening locally, in the state, in the nation, and internationally. So, Victoriano Mantega became such a popular lector, such a respected reader, that they would refer to him as the professor, the teacher, but more frequently than not, the intellectual, because he could speak about so many subjects. And the afternoon readings, the newspapers were not involved at all. The afternoon readings were famous novels or novelas, all read in Spanish. They didn't necessarily have to have been written in Spanish, because they could read novels written by famous French, Italian, German, Irish, but the lectures, the lectura, the readings were all in the Spanish language. So in the morning you got 1 hour and a half of local, state, national, and international news, and in the afternoon you got classical readings where you could listen to the great novels of the world. During the lunch, I can assure you, the conversations were all about what sports team was winning, who was leading in the baseball or this or that, because that is what the cigar makers had just heard in the morning reading. Victoriano makes a great impression among the many lectores that we had in Tampa. And he came up with the idea that he wanted to start a newspaper. As a result, by 1922, Victoriano leaves his duties as a lector and founded his newspaper. By that time, he had already married, and he had a young son, Roland, who was Patrick's father. You can see that La Gaceta, in a 100-year period, has never left the family. It has always been owned by the same family, the Mantega family, and now it is in its third generation in the hands of Patrick. The newspaper was published, as I said, on a weekly basis, and did not become a bilingual English-Spanish newspaper until June 15, 1954, English was introduced, and a few weeks later, May 7, 1954, the Italian page was introduced. So now you have a newspaper weekly, not a daily, but a trilingual newspaper. The only trilingual newspaper in all of our country is here in Tampa, and we single it out for recognition during this centennial. So La Gaceta becomes a trilingual Spanish, English, and Italian newspaper published every week. And then Roland who has now returned from active combat duty in the Pacific during the Second World War, becomes more involved with his dad in the newspaper and starts writing articles in English and develops a particular article titled As We Heard It. As We Heard It becomes a most important political voice, read not just locally, but read all over the state of Florida. His reputation as a prognosticator as to events that are going to happen, especially political events, becomes a demand every Friday in Tallahassee, in Jacksonville, in Miami, wherever. What does Roland say in As We Heard It? What politician is ahead? What politician is falling behind? What change is the legislature going to make? What is going to happen with the local mayor's race? All of that, the public here listened carefully to the voice of Roland Montega in his article called As We Heard It. Victoriano continued to participate actively until about 1962, when he passed the reins to Roland as the editor and publisher, though Victoriano continued writing articles in Spanish until 1979. That's when his last article appeared. The founder of La Gaceta died at the age of 87 on July 30, 1982, and Roland continued in his father's footsteps until his passing in September 25, 1998, when his son, Patrick, who is with us today, took over as publisher and editor. Just to indicate to you the significance and credibility that Roland Montega had, that his eulogy here in Tampa in 1998 was delivered by none other than Florida Governor Lawton Chiles. And so, as we move on, La Gaceta, by the way, was not the only Spanish language newspaper that was being published here. At one time, we had 5, we had 6, we had 8 newspapers, because we had such a large Spanish-speaking population. They could sell those newspapers to their own subscribers and customers. So La Gaceta continued and, of course, outlived all of its competitors. Victoriano Montega would always publish saying that La Gaceta was the only U.S. newspaper that had a direct cable service from Cuba and Spain. If you wanted to know what was happening in Cuba, you read La Gaceta. If you wanted to know what was happening in Spain, you read La Gaceta. And Victoriano Montega was always a very open-minded individual, but always on the side of the little guy, always on the side of the forgotten citizen, always on the side of the worker, always on the side of the unions. Roland acquired a reputation, as I said, for his political acumen in predicting races, giving political news and opinions. And as Roland continued to grow in credibility, so did La Gaceta. It continued to grow, and in time becomes the voice of the immigrant community in Tampa. It documented all of the events, social, political, religious, matrimonial, court cases, all in a chronological documentation that today, the archives have become a most valuable piece of resource. There's no better documentation of what has happened in Tampa, in the Latin community, over the last 100 years than going back into the newspapers, the archives, the photography of La Gaceta. They became the chroniclers of an era. Roland, in turn, when he takes over from his father, and then followed by Patrick with Roland's passing, they have become the chroniclers of a century. La Gaceta has been the beacon of independent thought and information, publishing bits and pieces of yesteryears, slices of life from the past have come to life every week in the pages of La Gaceta in a constant dribble of facts, faces, dates, and events, in and out, and in the center of our history and culture, making it come alive, not forgotten, not overlooked, not ignored, and best of all, our comprehensive history, thanks to La Gaceta and the Manteiga family. This rich resource of archival history is available. Tony Pizzo, the great historian of Tampa, before he died, said that in many years of researching, we have not found a more important source on the history of Ybor City than La Gaceta. La Gaceta covers the intimate activities of the Cubans, the Spaniards, and the Italians in the Latin cigar town. The paper is a window into the dramatic past of the cigar workers, the tabaqueros. The spirit of these people is well preserved in the daily stories found in La Gaceta. And then, of course, when Roland is heading up La Gaceta, it is their 75th anniversary. And Roland puts out a super special edition called the 75th Special Centennial Celebration. It impressed the people of Florida so much that the Secretary of State of Florida, George Firestone, sent out a personal message to Roland Manteiga concerning this special 75th anniversary edition, saying, as the chief elected official charged with the preservation of Florida history, I want you to know that you have provided an outstanding record of Tampa then and now. I am asking our Division of Historical Resources to place the July 3, 1987 75th special edition of La Gaceta in our state archives to be permanently preserved as part of Florida history. The Manteiga family, during the full century, 1922 to this year, 2022, have told us real, daily, inside stories of Ybor City and West Tampa, and the trials, agonies, and successes of the immigrant working class in the midst of the Deep South, the defenders of the little people, the disenfranchised, the overlooked, and the ignored foreigners, and it's all there in the archives of La Gaceta in black and white, Latino history of Tampa, saved by the Montega family saved forever for posterity. La Gaceta has been, in these 100 years, the champion of the voiceless and the champion of righteousness. We should be very proud of this accomplishment. Congratulations to the Montega family. And now, I am given a second assignment to tell you what else was happening in 1922. Well, I don't want to forget that in 1922, 100 years ago this year, for the very first time, Tampa had a radio station. WDAE started, and people were fascinated by that little contraption where they could hear everything that was happening. But something else happened in 1922. First of all, Dale Mabry is one of Tampa's most famous landmarks. If you live in Tampa, if you work in Tampa, if you travel through Tampa, more likely than not, you will want to know, where is Dale Mabry? It is Tampa's busiest street. It is the longest street in our community. From the main gate at MacDill Air Force Base, it has become a key artery that goes all the way from north past the football stadium, all the way north past Carrollwood and Lutz, all the way north into Pasco County, Land O'Lakes, and continues to communities north. But what was Dale Mabry before we called it Dale Mabry? It was a country road, seldom used, way on the west side of Tampa in Hillsborough County, and it was called Vera's Street, V-E-R-A. But as the Second World War was getting started, our military forces opened MacDill Air Base at the southern end of the Tampa Peninsula. We now call it MacDill Air Force Base. And they also opened another air base in a small airfield that we have where HCC now has their headquarters on Tampa Bay Boulevard in Dale Mabry. That little field was called Drew Field. The American government, preparing for war, knew that they were opening these two air bases, and they needed a very strong, sturdy, wide highway because they were going to be transporting not just troops, but they were going to be transporting motors, airplane engines, other heavy equipment. So Vera Street became Dale Mabry. And your question would be, who was Dale Mabry? Where did that name come from? Well, as you're seeing, that's a picture of Captain Dale Mabry. He is a Tampa hero, a forgotten hero, who was killed navigating a huge blimp called the Roma, and it happened February 21, 1922. 100 years ago this year in Norfolk, Virginia. This is the centennial of the death of this young Tampa captain in our Air Corps. Captain Dale Mabry was 30 years old on that terrible day that became the worst tragedy in the early history of American aviation. When he came to Tampa as a teenager, he had been born in Tallahassee. He had gone to high school in Marion, Alabama, and graduated from Marion Military Institute, and the family had moved to Tampa. His older brother was Giddings Mabry. He became a most important member of the bar here in Tampa, president of the Bar Association, city attorney for the city of Tampa, county attorney for the county of Hillsborough, really a leading attorney. And his father not only had been the lieutenant governor of Florida, but had been a justice in the Florida Supreme Court. And the father, when he retired from the Florida Supreme Court, retired to Tampa to practice law with Giddings Mabry in a law firm that was then called Mabry and Mabry. Their younger son, by the name of Dale, came to Tampa and became a real estate agent working for the family real estate company, real estate and investment. But as a young teenager, he was fascinated by something new that was happening called aviation. So from an early aviation enthusiast, he became a pioneer in military aviation. And during the World War I, he became a balloonist. We don't hear that word. We call them blimps, flying machines that fly like the original Zeppelin flying machine. A blimp, a more technical term, is a dirigible. From the word, you can direct it where you want it to go. He became an expert at navigating in midair. Tragically, it was February 21, 1922. He was a captain in the U.S. Army Air Corps, test flying a big, giant flying machine called an airship filled with hydrogen, a blimp, as you and I call it. But it was a big, giant blimp called the Roma, like Rome in Italy, the Roma, there in Norfolk, Virginia. It was there that with his crew, he is in the ship directing it. They had put 2 new motors in the airship, and they were testing how these new motors were acting or reacting to the ship. On that trial trip, things did not go as they would have hoped, and it was Captain Dale Mabry at the controls when the steering controls of the dirigible started to fail. Captain Mabry, realizing the danger and looking down and seeing the citizenry that was looking up at this spectacular airship, realized that the ship is going down. But thanks to Dale Mabry, he ably maneuvered the blimp away from the people on the ground. It could have been so much worse, but for his heroic sacrifice. Think of the explosion. Think of the massive skeleton in flames, with flames going up 800 feet. Everyone finding any way that they could get out of that burning inferno. Thick black smoke filled the air, and the heat was so great that not one person could get near it. It took many hours to douse the flames. It was obvious that it was not a rescue mission. After the fire marshals gave the approval, the recovery of the bodies was underway, some completely unrecognizable. The last man to be pulled out was recovered in a manner that only the brother could have identified Dale Mabry. By serendipity, Dale Mabry's brother, an older brother from Tampa, was practicing dentistry in a vicinity near Norfolk. And when the Roma went down, he went there wondering, did my brother make it? And he, with all the others, had to wait hours and hours until the fire finally subsided. There was a skeleton of that Roma left, and it was Dr. Jesse Mabry that went onto the burned remains of the Roma. And there, with the hands still gripping the steering mechanism, was his younger brother, Dale Mabry. The whole ship had been lost, but the people on the ground had been saved. And so, 2 days later, when the funeral arrangements had been completed, it was Dale Mabry's coffin that led the funeral procession there near Langley, what we now call Air Force Base. And right close to the casket was the mascot dog that always accompanied Captain Mabry and his crew. It was a very emotional, very full-packed funeral recognizing these heroes. 34 men had sacrificed their lives advancing aviation on behalf of the U.S. Army Corps. During that public funeral, Captain Dale Mabry's heroic conduct was recognized. It was the single deadliest and greatest air disaster of a U.S. hydrogen blimp airship. After this catastrophe, U.S. airships were inflated with helium and not hydrogen. 15 years after Dale Mabry and his men lost their lives, 15 years later in 1937, there was a horrendous blimp coming from Germany called the Hindenburg that also exploded. And the United States government decided, let's concentrate on other forms of aviation and not on these flying balloons. Justice Mabry, as I said, had died in Tampa before his son was killed tragically. It was then time to recognize this hero. And since he had been born in Tallahassee, in 1929, Tallahassee had named their municipal airport in honor of Captain Dale Mabry. And it was known during the Second World War as the Dale Mabry Army Air Base, but that was decommissioned in 1945. And we did not forget Dale Mabry in Tampa, and we had a wonderful dedication ceremony at the East Gate of Dale Mabry, presided by Mabel Mabry, a niece of Captain Dale Mabry, and the daughter of that famous lawyer that I mentioned, Giddings Mabry, representing the family's highway namesake, together with other Mabry relatives, but accompanied by the mayors of Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, and county officials from the Pinellas and Hillsborough County area. Dale Mabry is also remembered in an elementary school that we have there in South Tampa on Estrella. Whatever happened to Drew Field, EJ? Drew Field became Tampa International Airport. So that tells you how important aviation was to Tampa. And you might say, well, how big was that Dale Mabry Road? Well, initially it died at Buffalo Avenue, which we now call Martin Luther King. But in 1955, it was opened up all the way to Hillsborough. But we couldn't cross Hillsborough, so we had to build an overpass. And then you kept developing, and Carrollwood developed, and Lutz developed, and then we came to Gunn Highway, and Dale Mabry could not cross Gunn, so we built a second overpass. And then Dale Mabry continued going north, all the way north, and now you know the rest of the story. The next time that you're on Dale Mabry, look up, salute, and say, "Thank you, Captain Dale Mabry."
Thank you very, very much. I know you can listen to him all day, all day. He really puts the pieces together. It is wonderful. We are, year after year, we're privileged to have both the Honorable E.J. Salsinas and Fred Hearns. Oh, you can listen to them all day. Thanks for YouTube. Thanks for CTTV. We appreciate it so very much. And congratulations once again to La Gaceta. Really. We would like to thank the Mayor's Youth Corps, the Archives and Records Division, and Jennifer Dietz and Allison Smith. Why don't y'all stand? Go ahead, be recognized. And the rest of archives, other archives members here. All right. Thank you. They've worked very, very hard, and really appreciate all of their work. And congratulations to our Archives Awareness Partners on their programs, events, and exhibits. And thank you very much for year after year after year participating. We really appreciate it. Please pay attention to our historians. May you live forever. May you really live forever. And really try to talk to them. Talk to them. I can't emphasize how important it is to really get the rest of the story. And you tell a story so well. It's like the old movies and you see the wavy lines and it will take you back. Yes, yes. Thank you very much for your attendance. We really appreciate you. And thanks for helping Tampa celebrate. Anybody hear about a celebration party? I heard that there was going to be a celebration party. I hope that's true. Anyway, as you exit the program today, members of the Mayor's Youth Corps will be passing out the commemorative booklets. And before you leave today, stop by the first floor to see our Tampa in 1922 exhibit in the mascot room, and enjoy light refreshments next door in the Sister Cities room. There will be many other great programs during Archives Awareness Week throughout Tampa, and we hope to see you there. We are humbled again and grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to help us celebrate Tampa's 135th birthday. You know this is the greatest city, right? Yes. Not bragging, just stating the facts. Anyway, thank you, and have a good evening.